Gospel of Luke, chapter 2. The Gospel of Luke, chapter 2. I'm going to read this morning the first 7 verses of the Gospel of Luke, chapter 2. These verses are often called the traditional Christmas story. Now, I'm going to read them from the New American Standard Version of the Bible. And you please follow along with whatever translation of God's Word that you have with you. Luke says, "Now in those days a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that a census be taken of all the inhabited earth." This was the first census taken while Quirinius was governor of Syria. And so everyone was on his way to register for the census, each to his own city. And so Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the city of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and family of David, in order to register along with Mary, who was engaged to him, and who was with child. And while they were there, the days were completed for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in cloths, and laid him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. As I said, these first 7 verses of Luke's 2nd chapter are often called the traditional Christmas story. We call these verses the traditional story because when you read this story, you recognize that these verses contain some of the critical historical information about the birth of Christ. It really happened, and it happened during the rule of Caesar Augustus, otherwise known as the Roman Emperor Octavian, the nephew and adopted son of Julius Caesar, who rose to power by defeating Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. And everybody's going, do we care about that? And I said, yeah, we do care about that, because I sort of remember some of that history, at least the version that had Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor in it, right? That's how most of you know the names Mark Antony and Cleopatra, right? Of course. And when you love it, he almost made it all the way through. He almost did. I don't know about you, but at Christmas, you know, if you can't be all googly and silly and fumbly with babies, I mean, that just brings it all home. And when you read the traditional Christmas story, you also recognize that in these verses there is a magnificent display of God's power at work in the provision that He made for the fulfillment of prophecy with the Messiah being born in Bethlehem. Do you realize what happened in these verses? God gave Augustus such power and such an administrative drive that he could wave his hands from Rome and cause a census to be taken of the entire Roman world, forcing Joseph to go from his to his ancestral home, the city of David, Bethlehem. And if you let that sink in, you think, wow, that's impressive that God would pull all of this history together. So when you read this story, you see the history, you see God at work. But for some reason, when we read this story, we absolutely fail to recognize the discomfort in the last verse in this passage. I want you to look at it again. Look at verse 7. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and she wrapped him in strips of cloth, and then laid him in a manger because there was no room for them in the inn. Maybe it's know this story so well? Maybe it's because we come to this story every year. Maybe it's because we do things like baby dedications, or where you hear the Sunday night of the children's presentation, and the little children came out dressed in shepherd costumes. I mean, if you've never seen a shepherd that tall, that was pretty impressive. And we had the whole manger scene there in costume with 3 and 4 and 5-year-olds. And this morning we've done a baby dedication. Maybe it's because we know this passage so well, and we do so much ooh and ah at this time of the year that we don't pay attention to this verse. We're not moved by it. And our compassion and our sympathy don't kick in. I mean, do you realize what we just read? Mary is 9 months pregnant. She has traveled by foot, maybe a little bit of the time by donkey, maybe a little bit of the time by cart, and we're not talking premium shock absorbers here. So even if it was by cart, it was rough. She has traveled 90 miles from Nazareth in the north to Bethlehem in the south. 9 months pregnant, 90 miles, on foot. The road is unpaved and rocky. The weather would be harsh. The nights would be cold. Mary and Joseph, traditionally, if they were traveling this route, would have worn heavy, heavy woolen cloaks to shed the rain and break the wind. And under those woolen cloaks, long robes, and under the robes, long woolen socks to protect their legs from the bushes, and then whatever might pass, whatever they called shoes. They would have covered not much more than 10 miles a day because Mary was pregnant. Scholars tell us that folks in that age could cover 20 miles a day by foot, but probably didn't cover that much because Mary was pregnant. Travel rations included lots of bread. Breakfast would be dried bread. Lunch would be oil and bread. Ooh, there's a treat. And supper would be herbs and oil and bread. Yum, yum. Just what I want when I'm walking 10 miles a day. Dry bread. When they finally got there, there was no room for them. The English translations say there was no room in the inn, but y'all, we're not talking about the Marriott here. There were no commercial establishments, and certainly no reservations, no 800 numbers. The Greek literally says here there was no room in the lodging place, which would have most likely have been a room with a family member or friend that they were saving for them, knowing that they would come. And it is most likely that Roman soldiers had probably taken that room by force and said, "We'll have it." And that left Mary and Joseph with a final option for the birth of their child: a manger. The word manger literally means eating trough. If you've noticed in any nativity scene, a little cross-X stand with some hay in it, that's a manger. Sometimes made of wood, sometimes carved out of stone. And it could have been an eating trough in kind of a shed attached to their friend or family member's house. It could have been an eating trough in a marketplace where animals would be for sale. Most scholars actually think that it was an eating trough in a small cave in a hillside that shepherds would occasionally use for shelter. We know this story too well. And because we know it too well, we miss that this is not a happy story. It is a joyful story. Now, I want to be clear about that because it's the story of the birth of the Messiah. But this story was no picnic for Mary and Joseph. And that's what I want you to get this morning. I really want you to get that this event was no picnic for Mary and Joseph. I want you to understand that the first Christmas was most definitely not all ooh and ah. And that may take a little work on your part, because you understand there's a lot of pressure this time of the year. There's a lot of pressure in the Christmas season to think that everything has to be pretty and happy. Do y'all know that? Shake your head like this. You know that? I mean, think about it. The trees, the lights, the parties, the gifts, everything tells us at Christmas time, put on a happy face. It's not always possible. And think about just what's happening in our church family. Some of our families are grieving. We just buried Florida Ward and Claude Moore. Some of our families are dealing with health issues. Miss Maria's wrapping up treatment. Miss Gail Dixon's still going through treatment. Miss Kathy Bennett's going to be starting treatment. Some of our families are dealing with emotional situations. Are all of our families this year at Christmas going to have a Burl Ives, holly, jolly Christmas? No. So, why are we here? What's the real scoop on Christmas? How are we supposed to respond to the fact that verse 7 is a very uncomfortable verse in this story? Well, let me make it very simple for you. Number one, for anybody who is hurting this year, for anybody who is stressed out this year, for anyone who has a good, healthy dose of Mary and Joseph, this is not comfortable this year. Please know that Jesus understands. He has literally been there and done that. And I want you all to understand that the real spirit of Christmas allows the words unsure, worried, hurting, and not happy. Does that allow anybody in the room just to go, oh, I'm so glad you said that? I'm telling you, it's okay. The Jesus who was born in a cold and a damp manger knows how to walk with us in every hurt of life. And he doesn't, here's the best part, he doesn't have to be coaxed. He wants to be there. He wants to walk with us. And so, oh my goodness, whatever you do, don't push him away. Let him be part of your life. Number two, for anyone who is okay this year, if you're listening to me talk about the discomfort of Christmas and you're going, man, brother, Ed, things are going pretty good right now. Wonderful. You know, you're not bad. Wonderful. Enjoy the season. But would you do two things for me? First, would you recognize that the hurting folks are with us? And I would encourage you to be the wise men and bring gifts of encouragement. Get alongside somebody that you know, and not everybody wants everybody to know what their problems are. I understand that. But get alongside folks that you may know are stressed, uncomfortable, maybe not happy. Put your arm around them. Love on them. Stick a $20 bill in their pocket. Encourage. Whatever it takes. I mean, even if chicken soup is the thing, whatever. And then second, if things are going well for you, finish the season. Let me say that one more time. Finish the season. If you've done the trees and the lights and the parties and the gifts, and everything's going pretty well, great, but finish the season. What I mean by that is take it all the way through. See the whole thing. Don't leave Jesus Make sure that you understand that the baby grew up, lived a sinless life, died on the cross for your sins, was resurrected by the glory and power of God to become our risen Lord. Don't leave him in a manger. Make sure at Christmas you see the baby, but make sure you know that the baby grew up. Make sure you see the one who becomes the Lord of our lives, who should be our King and should be our guide and our rule. And if he speaks to you, if he puts a claim on your life, if he says, I want you to do this, if he calls you to get closer to him, answer those calls. But if you're hurting, then put your trust in your faith in the one who absolutely understands every step you are taking. And if those of us who are hurting will do that, and those of us who are happy will do the things we're supposed to do, then we really can have a Merry Christmas. Will you stand in prayer, please? Father, thank you for the blessings of this day. Thank you for the joy in our time together, our chance to bless Finn and Isla, Harley. We're thankful for them. We're thankful for one another. We're glad that we can spend these few moments together saying that you are a good and wonderful God, and that we love you, and that we trust you. And even if we have to deal with some situations at Christmas time, our prayer is that through those events, through those trials, you will draw us closer to yourself. We know, Father, that you love us and that we can trust you with every part of our life. There may be someone here this morning that needs to make a decision about how they're going to trust you. And we want to give time for that, Father. So if you've laid it on someone's heart to make a decision and share it with your church, whether to talk about their faith, join this congregation, rededicate their lives, whatever you've called anyone to do, would you give them the grace to share that with the church family? And that'll be a blessing to us as well. This is your time, Father. Would you speak to our hearts as you always do?